Welcome to Twilight Fables, where classic tales take a haunting turn. Tonight's story is a chilling reimagining of Cinderella, one cloaked in sorrow, whispered curses, and ash. The house creaked even when no one moved. It groaned like a creature straining against invisible chains. The old timbers of the manor aching under years of silence and secrets. Ella sat at the hearth, her fingernails blackened with soot, her hair stiff with smoke, her skin smudged with ash, as if the fireplace had tried to consume her whole and failed. But she didn't mind the filth. She had learned to wear it like armour. The fire hadn't been lit in days, yet the coals still glowed faintly in the pit, pulsing like the heart of something buried alive. She slept beside it every night, curled in cinders that didn't cool, whispering to shadows that replied in voices too soft to be real. Her stepmother insisted the room remain cold. A proper girl shouldn't be so close to the fire. It makes you wild, she would hiss. But Ella knew better. The cold didn't care if you cried. The fire did. It remembered. Once, long ago, her mother would sit where she sat now, spinning wool and singing songs so sweet. The walls themselves seemed to hum along, but her mother's voice was gone now, replaced by silence, and her loom stood abandoned in the attic, wrapped in sheets like a corpse. Ella's mother had died quickly. One day she'd coughed, and the next she'd bled from the mouth, crimson soaking the white lace of her gown like spilled wine. They buried her in the garden behind the house, beneath a flowering tree whose blooms never returned. Afterward, her father remarried. He'd gone to market and come back with a wife and 2 daughters, sharp-eyed, pale-lipped girls with hollow laughter and twitching fingers. The new woman was beautiful in the way frozen lakes were beautiful, reflective, cold, and ready to crack. Then her father left too, a trip to a neighbouring province, a letter sent, a storm, a cart overturned in a ravine, nothing but a sealed box returned. Ella was 12. She became the maid of her own home, though the word maid implied kindness and structure. There were no rules here, only demands. The new sisters, Lena and Corinne, delighted in inventing humiliations. "Clean the floor with your tears," Lena would giggle. "Sing to the rats, maybe they'll marry you," Corinne sneered once. And the rats did come that night, lining the walls like attentive guests. Her stepmother didn't speak often. When she did, her voice was too smooth, too calm, like silk over blades. "A girl like you belongs in the ash. You were born from dust, and dust you'll stay." But Ella had something they didn't. She had the fire, and the fire, it seemed, had her. It began with whispers. At first, she thought it was her mind, fracturing under loneliness. That would have been a comfort, but the voices came even when she was still, even when she was dreaming, soft and smoky, like breath against glass. "Do you miss her?" Ella had jolted awake the first time. The coals were a dull red, not alive, but not dead either, like something between states. "Who's there?" she whispered, trembling. "She's still here, little ash girl." "Mother!" No answer, only the sound of a crackling coal, and then a soft hiss like something wet had been thrown on the fire. The next day, she found her mother's hairbrush by the hearth, not where she remembered placing it. The bristles were warm. A single strand of silver blonde hair was tangled between them, though her mother's hair had turned grey. Only in her final weeks, Ella didn't question it. She began to talk to the fire. "Why did she die?" she whispered one night. "She was taken. By what? By what always comes for women who shine too bright?" The fireplace pulsed. A log rolled over without touch. Embers spat. "But ashes can hide a brighter flame. Do you want it back?" Ella hesitated. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what it was, but she wanted something back. Her mother, her dignity, her life before this endless servitude. "Yes." "Then you must give." "Give what?" No answer, just a gust of heat, and the stench of roses burnt black. The following week, her stepmother summoned her. "The garden is dying," she said. "Go plant something, anything. Make it look presentable before the festival." Ella obeyed. She wandered through the overgrown hedges, the brittle branches, the blackened soil where her mother's grave sat untouched, a stone with no name, a tree with no flowers. She remembered the voice. "You must give." From her room, she fetched the locket that once belonged to her mother. Inside was a painted miniature, Ella and her mother, smiling beneath that very tree. She buried it in the soil beneath the roots, and something shifted. The wind changed. The scent of roses, sweet and rancid, filled the air. The ground warmed beneath her fingers. She swore she felt something exhale beneath the dirt. That night, the fire was stronger. "Did I do right?" she asked. "You've planted the seed. Now feed it." "Feed it what?" "You." Ella didn't sleep. She sat beside the fire, fingernails digging into her palms. The house moaned above her, as if in pain. The stairs groaned like footsteps. The windows wept condensation that tasted of salt. The next morning, the tree had changed. It was taller, thicker, pale and twisted. Its bark shimmered like glass under the sun. No leaves, no flowers, just translucent bark with black veins running through it. A crow sat in its branches and stared directly at her. It did not blink. She began to dream of it. In her dreams, the tree whispered. It called her by name, but not Ella. It used her full name, a name no one had spoken in years. Elaria. It showed her things, visions of dresses made of spider silk and bone, shoes carved from crystal, masks with human expressions stitched onto their surfaces, and beneath it all, dancing, women in gowns that screamed, princes whose faces melted when the music stopped, a ballroom made of broken mirrors. She awoke each time with blood on her hands and soot on her skin. The house noticed. Her sisters grew quiet around her. Lena stopped laughing. Corinne stopped mocking. Once, She caught them both watching her through a crack in the parlour door, eyes wide, mouths tight. They whispered behind her back, "She's changing. She talks to nothing. She's cursed." Her stepmother said nothing, but one evening Ella entered the kitchen to find her standing near the hearth, staring into the coals. "You've been speaking to things that don't belong here," she said, not turning around. Ella said nothing. Her stepmother turned slowly. Her eyes were darker than usual. "They always come for girls like you. Remember that?" That night, the fireplace whispered again. "She fears you now. You are becoming." "Becoming what?" "What you were meant to be. Not servant, not daughter, something else." A new voice joined then, higher, musical, like wind chimes through smoke. "Give more. The tree is hungry. What more can I give? Something that hurt you, something that defined you." She thought of her first day, scrubbing the floors as her sisters danced. She thought of her father's last words, "Be good for them, won't you?" She thought of the time they cut her hair with shears, laughing as the blonde curls fell to the floor. She went to her room and she cut away what was left. She buried her hair beneath the tree. The next day it bloomed, not flowers, but glass petals, sharp-edged and glittering. They swayed in a wind that didn't touch the other plants. The crow was gone. In its place, something larger sat in the branches, a shadow with too many limbs, and a face that looked like her own, only older and made of cracks. She didn't run. She bowed. The thing in the tree wore her face, but wrong. Its skin was tight, like porcelain stretched too thin. Its eyes were empty sockets, filled with swirling ash. Its smile never moved, but it was wide, too wide, as if carved into place. The creature stared down from the blooming branches with a reverence that made Ella's stomach knot. She knew somehow that this thing had been watching her long before it showed itself. It didn't speak aloud. Its thoughts slid into hers, smooth and slow like oil on glass. "You fed me." She nodded, unable to look away. "You were always meant to. The seed was planted before you were born." A gust of wind pushed against her, warm and dry like oven breath. The glass petals chimed with the sound of shattering bones. "What are you?" she whispered. "I am what remains of the women who gave everything. I am hunger. I am inheritance." Its hands, if you could call them that, were too many and too long, folding around the branches like silk unravelling. It held something between its claws, a needle made of bone. There is more to give. That night, Ella could not sleep. She tried lying beside the hearth, but the fire had gone out completely for the first time in weeks. Even the coals were cold. The voice had gone silent. All that remained was the memory of that face in the tree, smiling without kindness, smiling like it had waited too long and finally found its moment. In her hands, she held the object it had given her, the needle, bone-white, hollow and warm. It pulsed faintly. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt calm, like this was always meant to happen. The tree had bloomed, and now it wanted a garment to hang from its branches, a dress made from obedience. She began sewing in the mornings when her chores were done. At first, it was just scraps, old cloth she found in the attic, remnants of her mother's belongings, but the fabric resisted her touch. Threads snapped, needles broke. Then she found a locked chest. It was buried beneath dusty linens and a trunk of rotting books. The chest had no key, but when her fingers brushed its latch, it opened with a hiss, like breath escaping a mouth held shut too long. Inside was fabric unlike anything she'd seen before. It shimmered between silk and skin, pinkish and opalescent, too soft yet too heavy. As she lifted it, it clung to her arms like a second layer of flesh. It had once belonged to her mother. At least it had her scent, lilac and smoke. She didn't ask where it came from. She began to sew. The bone needle moved without her guidance. It knew the pattern. It wove spirals and seams she couldn't see until they formed. She bled often, more than she should have. The thread bit her fingers as it passed through. Sometimes it would snake into her skin, stitching her to the dress itself, only to loosen once the seam was finished. She never bled on the fabric. The dress drank her before a drop could fall. At night, she dreamed of her mother's hands, long and elegant, dancing over a spinning wheel, but they weren't attached to arms. They floated alone in darkness, still spinning, still working. She woke each morning, sore and smiling. By the third day, her sisters noticed. "You're glowing," Lena said, her voice tight. "Or sweating," Corinne muttered. "Why are you always smiling?" Ella said nothing. She simply walked past them with a pail of water that steamed in her hands despite the chill. They didn't follow her into the garden. No one ever did. The tree had grown again. Its branches now stretched over the entire patch like an umbrella of bone and glass. Things hung from it now, ornaments of hair and ribbon, small shapes that pulsed and sighed. She recognized some of them, doll parts from her childhood, her old locket now twisted into a spiral. The tree had taken more than she'd offered, but she didn't feel robbed. She felt lighter. The bone needle whispered when she touched it. Soon. The voice from the hearth had not returned, but the needle filled the silence. It told her when to thread, when to cut, when to bleed. Her obedience made the dress stronger. On the 7th night, her stepmother summoned her again. "You've been neglecting your work," she said, without turning from the window. Ella said nothing. "You reek of the garden." Still, silence. Her stepmother turned. Her eyes were different, wider, the skin around them twitching. "You speak to things that no longer belong to this world." Ella's mouth twitched. "They were here long before you," she said softly. "Before you married into this house, before you buried my mother." Her stepmother stiffened. "She died of fever. She died of you," Ella said. voice sharp as glass. And now she's waking. The older woman stepped back. She'll burn you too. I won't burn, Ella whispered. I am the ash. The next day, the invitation arrived. A scroll bound in gold ribbon, carried by a man with no eyes and a stitched mouth. He handed the scroll to Ella directly, ignoring the shrieks of her sisters. When she unrolled it, the paper shimmered, an invitation to the palace. 3 nights of celebration, a chance to win the prince's favour. She did not laugh. She did not cry. She simply returned to her needle and continued sewing. Her dress was nearly done. It did not look like a dress anymore. It moved. It breathed. When she held it up, it clung to her like a child to a mother. When she wore it, only briefly, it melted to her skin and whispered in her ear, in her mother's voice, "You are almost ready, my ash girl." The bone needle pulsed once and cracked in half. Its work was done. That night, she returned to the tree. The sky was black and still. The moon hung low, like an eye watching from behind a veil. The creature was waiting, still wearing her face, but now it smiled with approval. Ella bowed. "I have obeyed," she said. "Then you may go." "Go where?" "To the dance, to the palace, to the feast." It reached out a hand, not claws now, but soft, warm, maternal. "You will be chosen." "What if I don't want to be?" The smile grew. "You already have been." Ella felt her feet move on their own. The ground split beneath her, and a pool of black water surged upward, surrounding her like a mirror pulled from the depths. From it emerged a carriage made of rib cages and horn. 6 beasts waited at its helm, shaped like horses, but with too many eyes. Her dress floated into place on her body. It stitched itself shut. Her shoes clicked into existence. Glass, sharp-edged and red-stained. She stepped into the carriage without looking back. The ash behind her curled upward, like a hand waving goodbye. The road to the palace should have been lined with torchlight and the clamour of celebration, but for Ella it was silence. The trees leaned too close. Their branches didn't sway. They listened. Shadows watched from behind trunks, too narrow to hide anything human. Her carriage rolled smoothly over the dirt, but the wheels left no track, and the horses made no sound. She sat upright, the dress tightening like a cocoon around her spine. It no longer whispered, it breathed, syncing with her heartbeat, reminding her that she was no longer alone in her body. Something inside her pulsed in tandem with the trees, the earth, and the distant thrum of music she could not yet hear. The palace rose ahead, like a wound carved into the horizon. It wasn't gold. It wasn't even stone. It was bone, white and jagged, spired like broken teeth, stabbing at the sky. The gates were shaped like jaws forced open. Beyond them, a garden spread out, not of flowers, but of statues, men and women mid-scream, twisted into dances they would never finish. The air hummed, and the scent of roses had returned. Only now it was rotted. The carriage stopped without warning. A figure stepped forward from the shadows beside the gates. Not a guard, not a man. Something that had once worn skin, but now stood flayed in place, its eyes sewn shut and its mouth wide open in an endless grin. It held out a single hand. Ella stepped down, her glass shoes clicking softly against the gravel, which wasn't gravel at all. Tiny teeth littered the path, bleached and gleaming. She placed her hand into the creature's palm. It didn't speak, but the gates groaned open with the cry of rusted hinges and ancient bones. The palace welcomed her in. The garden writhed beneath her steps. She passed roses whose petals had lips, vines that twitched like fingers, bushes trimmed into the shape of women she almost recognized, bent over, arms outstretched, mouths frozen in whispers. The statues all watched her. Their eyes followed her, even when broken. She stopped before a tall hedge shaped into a mirror, but no reflection looked back. Instead, she saw the fireplace from her home. The coals burned bright once more, and in them a shape, her mother's face, flickering and half-formed. "Do not forget yourself," Ella nodded and moved on. Inside the palace, the ballroom defied shape. Its walls shimmered like oil over water, never staying still. Chandeliers hung upside down. The ceiling was a pool, reflecting stars that did not match the sky outside, and hundreds of guests danced without music, their feet never touching the floor. They floated, men in masks made of porcelain, women in dresses made of blood veins and lace. No one spoke, but they all turned when she entered. The room stopped, and in the centre of it all stood the prince. He was not what she expected. He wore no crown, no sash, no gold, only a black suit stitched from threads that moved like spiders crawling through fog. His face was beautiful, in a way that invited unease, perfect symmetry, but not natural. His eyes were mirrors. When he looked at her, she saw herself, only not quite. He extended a hand. "Dance with me," he said. His voice was too many voices at once. She stepped forward. Her glass shoes bit into her skin, but she did not bleed. They danced. The floor pulsed beneath them, not like marble or wood, but flesh. With every step, she felt something sigh beneath her. The guests clapped in silence. The prince smiled. "You're not like the others," he said. "No," Ella replied. "They came to be chosen. I was chosen before I came." He tilted his head, fascinated. "Do you remember your mother's name?" "Yes." "What was it?" "Why?" she asked. "Because she stood here once, in this dress, in those shoes. She danced too." Ella's chest ached. The dress constricted. She wasn't chosen. She refused the crown, the prince whispered. She wanted love. "And you punished her?" He leaned close. She walked away. and left behind something stronger. His lips grazed her ear. You. The music returned then, not heard, but felt, humming through her bones, and the guests began to sing, not words, names of girls, hundreds, thousands, one name repeated over and over, like a warning. Elaria! She stopped dancing. The prince did not. He spun her, and when she landed, she stood alone. The ballroom was empty, the lights extinguished. Only one candle remained, burning at the centre of the room. Beside it, a staircase spiraled downward into blackness. Ella looked back. The doors were gone. The windows were gone. Only the stairs remained. The dress tugged her gently downward. The steps were made of bone. The walls were made of teeth. The deeper she went, the more the air thickened. Not hot, not cold, just wet. She descended until the last step vanished behind her. Ahead, a room opened. It was small. It was filled with mirrors, hundreds of them, each cracked, each reflecting a different version of her. Some wore the dress, some wore ash, some were twisted, some were burning. One bled from the mouth and smiled wide, and at the centre stood a chair, high-backed, throne-like, thorned and empty. The voice returned, not the tree, not the fire, something older. Take your place. Ella hesitated. What is this? The inheritance. She saw her mother in one mirror, younger, barefoot, crying. She refused it. You will not. The throne pulsed. The dress tightened. Her feet bled inside the glass, but she stepped forward and sat. Pain like fire raced through her spine. She screamed. The thorns pierced her dress, pierced her skin, wrapped through her lungs, her ribs, her heart. The mirrors shattered. The throne sank into the floor, pulling her with it, and she fell through ash and glass and blood, fell through her name, fell through everything. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the garden, but the statues had moved. They danced now, freely, and at the centre of it all, the prince bowed before her. My queen, he said, and vanished into smoke. The crown burned into her skull without touch. The throne grew from the roots of the tree, and Ella smiled. The garden of teeth bloomed. Ella sat in her new throne, but it didn't feel like sitting. It felt like sinking. The roots of the tree coiled around her legs, weaving into her flesh with the slow patience of ivy and inheritance. She didn't resist. Resistance was for girls. She was a woman now, a bride, a queen. The ash from the tree drifted like snow, falling over her hair and shoulders until she looked carved from soot and sorrow. Her glass shoes, once elegant and sharp, had melted into her feet. The dress no longer clung to her skin. It was her skin, seamless, pale, veined with golden thread that pulsed with memory. The throne throbbed beneath her, alive and ancient, shaped not for comfort but for consequence. The crown, sat weightless above her brow. It didn't press, it whispered, "You will reign in silence. You will never be forgotten. You will never be free." The palace had no king, only a procession of princes. They came in dreams. Each night a different face, each face beautiful and wrong. Some had hollow eyes, some bled when they smiled. One came headless, carrying his face in a jar of honey. They danced around her throne, naked and dripping in wax, murmuring things in the language of birds and bones. Each one offered something: a heart, a crown, a kingdom. Ella accepted none. She was not there to be courted. She was the court, and the dance never ended. Back in the mortal world, time limped forward. Lena and Corinne spent their days in the parlour, arguing over scraps of gossip they had not earned. The invitation to the second ball had come and gone. They had gone again, painted and perfumed, but the prince never returned to the ballroom. He had vanished like smoke after the first night, and no girl had claimed the crown. "He's hiding," Lena whispered one night, pacing, waiting for someone better. "Or dead," Corinne muttered, chewing the last of a candied plum. Stepmother said nothing. She sat by the fire that no longer warmed her. She had noticed Ella's absence, but not mourned it, not openly. Yet when no one looked, she stared too long into the ashes of the hearth, searching, worried, regretful, because part of her knew Ella had not left. She had arrived in the place between dreams. Ella's tree grew taller. It now split the palace in two, its roots reaching through the bones of the walls, its branches pressing through the sky like veins across a dead eye. Guests wandered its corridors like sleepwalkers, unaware that they were lost. The garden below bloomed teeth by the dozen. Some chattered when touched. Others whispered names of forgotten daughters. The mirrors in the lower chambers had returned, new ones, uncracked, showing moments Ella had never lived. A mother's kiss, a father's hand, a meal eaten in laughter, dresses stitched in joy, not blood. She turned them all away. "I am what was left," she whispered to the mirror. "And what remains?" The mirror shattered itself. The third invitation came wrapped in skin, a thin scroll sewn from parchment that pulsed faintly with breath. It arrived at Ella's old home in a box of salt. The man who delivered it had no face. This time, the stepmother did not read it aloud. She burned it instead, but it did not burn. It screamed, then curled into itself like a dying insect, and vanished in a puff of sulphur. Ella returned to the ballroom that night. The guests were different, taller, thinner, dressed in stars instead of fabric. Their mouths were sideways, their hands long as canes. They bowed low when she entered, their spines cracking in harmony. The prince stood among them once more, but he was diminished now, smaller, his crown wilted, his mirrors clouded. "You've outgrown me," he whispered. She tilted her head. "You were a door," she said. "And you," he replied, "were the key." He stepped forward and offered her his hand. A dagger rested in his palm. She took it. The blade pulsed like a heart. Her name carved itself along the steel. Ella Elaria of the Ash. She turned it toward him, but did not stab. She slit the air between them. The wound opened, and the palace gasped. Reality split. The mortal world and the nightmare kingdom collided like mirrors, falling into each other. Lena and Corinne awoke to ash on their pillows. The hearth spit embers into their mouths. The doors screamed when opened. Their dresses crawled off their skin like molting insects. They ran. They did not pack. They did not speak. They simply ran. The stepmother tried to follow, but the staircase had vanished. In its place was the tree. It grew now inside the house. Glass petals blooming from floorboards, roots curling through the bedposts, branches prying the ceiling apart. The fireplace laughed, and the tree spoke in Ella's voice. "You took what was never yours." The stepmother fell to her knees. "I gave you a home. You gave me a prison. I raised you. You buried me." And then the roots took her, not with violence, but with longing. They wrapped her gently, like hands curling around a forgotten doll, and she disappeared beneath the floorboards, leaving only the smell of roses. In the nightmare kingdom, Ella stood on a balcony of bone, watching the horizon drip black across the sky. The palace shifted behind her, reshaping itself to fit her grief. She was alone now. Even the tree had gone quiet. But she did not mourn. She had been many things: daughter, servant, seamstress, sacrifice. Now she was myth. The ash settled in her lungs like lullabies, and below, far beyond the palace, children would whisper her name before sleep. Ash girl, glass-footed queen, the one who waits, and in every fire a flicker of her smile would remain. They said the palace still held balls, even though the prince was gone, even though no new guests arrived, even though the moon above it no longer waned or waxed, just hung open like an eye too wide to blink. The music played every night, though no one could name the instruments. The sound came from the air itself, echoes from ribs hollowed like flutes, from windows that sighed in different tones when the wind pushed through their cracks. Ella did not sit on the throne anymore. She was the throne. Her presence lived in every branch, every note, every mirror. When she walked, the palace leaned. When she slept, the floors shivered, but sleep came less often now. Queens of ash do not rest. The guests still danced. Their bodies no longer touched the ground. Their faces blurred with each turn, as if the dance scraped away their features little by little. Some of them wept as they spun. Others smiled too widely, eyes empty of light. The ballroom floor had changed. It pulsed beneath them like a heartbeat, red and glistening. It was no longer floor at all. It It was the back of something sleeping just beneath the surface. Ella watched from the shadows behind the mirrors, where her true body now lived, not bound by skin, but woven from memory and myth. She moved between glass panes, like a shadow seeking a shape. On the 1000th night, the music changed. Someone new had arrived. He came barefoot. His eyes were stitched shut, his spine twisted like the branch of a withered tree. But in his hands, he held something few had carried into the palace. A memory, not of her, of before her. He knelt in the centre of the ballroom and offered it, a locket carved from rosewood, smelling faintly of earth and cinnamon. Ella stepped from the mirror and took it. When her fingers brushed the locket, the palace sighed and the music stopped. Every dancer froze mid-turn, necks snapping to face her. The chandeliers dimmed, the stars in the ceiling flickered out. Ella opened the locket. Inside was a portrait, a girl, not her, but close, brown eyes, threadbare smile, ash on her cheeks. The memory stung. It was the version of her who once dreamed of escape. The girl who sang to the mice, the girl who forgave, the girl who had died beneath the cinders. Ella closed the locket and pressed it to her heart. Then she turned to the dancers and lifted her arms. The music exploded, not sound, but colour. Shapes ripped through the walls, shadows with too many eyes, laughter made solid, perfume that burned like fire when inhaled, and the dancers spun again, faster, their limbs cracked, their spines lengthened, their feet blistered into hooves and claws, but they danced. Ella joined them. Each step she took grew the garden above. Each twirl sent roots deeper into the waking world. The palace fed on motion, on memory, on pain, and now it feasted, far away, in the village at the edge of the woods. The people began to forget, not just names, but shapes. Doors wouldn't open the same way twice. Mirrors refused to show reflections. Children were born without shadows. One little girl tried to tell her father about the woman in her closet, the one with glass toes and no face, the one who watched her sleep, the one who whispered lullabies made of weeping. He laughed until he opened the closet and found the ashes. Ella could feel the pull now. The world had thinned. The palace bled through its seams. Soon the two would fully merge, and when they did, there would be no more before. No more stepmother, no more kingdom. Only her, only the ball, only the dance that never ends. She sat beside the locket, now resting on a pedestal of teeth, and remembered she had once wanted a gown, a night of magic, a kiss, but now she wanted silence, obedience, eternity, and all of them danced, not because they chose to, but because she had. Back in the remains of her old house, the garden bloomed thorns from the floorboards. Mice chittered prayers to her name in the hollow walls. The mirror in the stepmother's old vanity showed only a single image now. The ballroom, spinning forever, with Ella at its centre, her arms outstretched, her dress flowing like smoke, her eyes empty of light and full of stars. And as midnight struck, the glass in the mirror spidered outward, cracking in time with a heartbeat no longer mortal. Somewhere in the woods, a girl ran, not from anything, but toward something. She had found a shoe, a glass one, warm to the touch. Inside it, a sliver of memory had whispered, "Come." She didn't know the story, only the hunger, only the sound of music at the edge of her dreams. She followed it, and behind her, the trees smiled. Midnight was broken. It no longer came once, like a clean blade through the day. It fractured, repeating itself like a curse. 12 chimes, then 12 more, then again, backwards, then in silence, until the world forgot whether it was night or never. The palace bells rang not in hours, but in hunger, and each ring sent the dancers into spasms of joy and fear, collapsing and rising like waves in a sea of bones. Ella watched it all from her mirror throne, woven now from 1,000 versions of herself. Each shard showed a different path, what she could have been, what she might yet become. A girl in rags, a bride in blue, a beast in flame. Each flickered in and out as her thoughts twisted, the palace mutating with them. She no longer wore the glass shoes. They had become her feet, sharp and clicking on the stone like the ticking of a great clock. With each step, time cracked again. She moved toward the grand clock tower in the centre of the palace. It had no face, only a gaping hole where numbers once lived, and inside a set of teeth that turned with the gears, grinding hours into dust. The prince had once lived here, but now the only thing left was his heart, strung like a pendulum and beating to the rhythm of her will. Elsewhere in the real world, time itself shuddered. Clocks reversed, sunsets hung motionless in the sky like dying fruit. People aged in reverse, forgetting names, growing teeth they had lost long ago. In a small village near the edge of memory, a girl named Mara awoke with her mouth full of soot. She had dreamed of a ballroom made of ribs. She had danced with a woman whose eyes were mirrors, and when she touched her, she heard all the names of the forgotten. She followed the dream's echo through the woods, drawn toward the place where things went to be remembered incorrectly. She was not the first. The palace called to those who were almost Ella, girls on the verge of story, girls who carried scars shaped like glass slippers, girls who had been promised a crown but only ever got ashes. Inside the palace, the dancers had begun to rot, not from age, from repetition. Their steps had worn grooves into the flesh of the floor. Their gowns were threads of shadow and memory, endlessly reforming but never new. They danced without music now. Only the hum of the broken midnight kept them moving. Ella stepped among them, and the room stilled. She pointed at one, The girl paused, her body twitching, unsure if it could stop. "Speak," Ella said. The girl opened her mouth, but only flies came out. Ella frowned. "Try again." The girl's eyes rolled back, and in a voice that came from somewhere below her, she spoke. "You were meant to marry him." Ella laughed. It echoed down the halls and shook dust from the chandeliers. "I was meant to end him." The prince had been beautiful. A trap is always beautiful. She remembered his eyes. They had sparkled with lies, with hope, with all the little promises girls are raised to worship. A night of magic, a kiss of salvation, a life no longer caged by chores and cruelty. And he had delivered it all, only to make her stay. Stay perfect, stay grateful, stay quiet. Ella had shattered that dream, but the palace still remembered, and it was hungry for more. In the clock tower, the gears began to slow. Something was wrong. Ella reached into the cavity where the prince's heart swung. It was cold. Still, she narrowed her eyes. Someone had entered the palace. Unafraid, Mara stepped through the threshold. She was not beautiful, not in the way the palace remembered beauty. No flowing dress, no hopeful eyes. She wore boots. Mud caked her sleeves. She held a knife carved from obsidian and bone, and she walked with a limp that told the palace one thing. She had already suffered. The doors did not try to stop her. They whispered warnings instead. "She'll see you. She'll make you forget your name. She was once like you." Mara walked on, through the ballroom where the dancers spun like ghosts, through the hall of mirrors where every reflection begged her to turn back, through the garden where roses bled when touched, and finally into the heart of the palace, where Ella waited. The moment their eyes met, the world shrank. Ella tilted her head. "You've come to kill me," she said. Mara didn't answer. She stepped forward. Her knife glowed faintly, lit not by magic, but by will. "I'm not the only one," Mara said. Behind her, in the folds of reality, others were coming. Girls who had been erased. Girls who had danced too long. Girls whose names had turned to ash. The palace trembled. Ella felt a sliver of something foreign. Fear. "You would end the story," she said. "No," Mara said. "I'd rather rewrite it." And then she ran. Their fight was not made of blades. It was made of memory. Ella summoned her past like armor. The attic where she wept. The cinders in her mouth. The song her mother never got to finish. Mara answered with her own. A sister who vanished. A night locked in a cellar. A shoe that didn't fit, but was forced on anyway. Each memory struck like lightning, and with every clash, the palace cracked, mirrors shattered, dancers fell. The clock began to bleed. Midnight rang again, once, twice, then never again. The clock tower folded into itself, devouring time. Ella screamed, a sound that peeled the gold from the walls. Mara stood tall, blood at her lip, knife raised. Ella stepped forward, slower now. glass feet cracked. "You'll take my place," she hissed. Mara shook her head. "I'll burn the throne." She drove the blade into the heart of the palace. The roots recoiled, the walls groaned, and the glass in Ella's body began to melt. Not from heat, from truth. The ballroom crumbled. The dancers vanished like candle smoke, and Ella fell to her knees, whispering a name she hadn't spoken in centuries, her own. In the real world, clocks began ticking again. Children remembered their birthdays. Mirrors showed only what they were supposed to, but in every fireplace, the ash still moved just a little too slowly, and sometimes, late at night, a girl might still hear a faint melody, one meant for dancing, one that never ends. The palace was dying, not quickly, not cleanly. It came apart the way dreams do, drifting, curling, rotting from the corners inward. The gardens no longer bled, they whispered instead. Leaves turned to lace, roses folded into moths and took flight. The mirrors wept quicksilver, and at the centre of it all, Ella knelt, melting into herself. She was no longer the girl in ashes, no longer the queen in glass. Her form flickered between states, bone, fire, silk, dust. As the curse unravelled, Mara stood over her, trembling. The obsidian knife still pulsed in her hand, but the palace had gone quiet. Its hunger abated. Now came the question no one ever thought to ask. What happens when you kill a myth that still remembers your name? Ella opened her mouth. Her voice was no longer sharp. It was small. "I didn't want this." Mara didn't answer. She remembered too well the faces of the lost girls, those who had vanished into fairy tales that turned into cages. Ella's sorrow might have been real, but it came after centuries of cruelty, spun from magic. "You could have stopped," Mara said softly. Ella blinked slowly, as if time was slipping unevenly across her mind. "I didn't know how." Around them, the palace groaned. Tiles curled upward like peeling skin. Paintings peeled their faces off. The dancers' remains collapsed into piles of gowns and teeth. Mara crouched beside her. "Then I'll teach you." Mara pressed the knife's hilt into Ella's palm. It hissed against her skin, not in pain, in memory. Images bloomed through the contact. Sunlight in an attic, a barefoot girl fleeing into the forest. The first time someone said, "You're nothing," and she believed it. Ella sobbed. It was not pretty. It was feral, cracking, the sound of grief wailing out of a throat too used to screaming commands. The palace began to bleed stars, not from wounds, from release. One by one, the mirrors turned black and shattered. The ballroom crumbled into ash, and a wind stirred through the halls, carrying forgotten names like pollen. Mara turned toward the fading light. "I think it's time," she said. Ella looked up, eyes rimmed with silver. "Where will I go?" Mara smiled. "Anywhere that doesn't remember you." Outside, the sky was no longer the same. It pulsed in shades of bruised lavender and dusk red gold. The forest that surrounded the palace had grown taller, stranger, lined with silhouettes of those who had been watching from the edges of belief. Girls, women, children, none had spoken. They simply waited, and when Ella stepped forward, barefoot and broken, they parted for her, not in forgiveness, in understanding. Even monsters are born from stories told wrong. Mara stayed behind. There was still one task left. The throne remained, now a tangled mess of teeth, roots, glass and bone. It pulsed softly, like a heart half asleep. She climbed it, not to sit, to end it. From her bag she drew a second shard of obsidian, one carved with runes, the stories of all the others. She drove it into the throne. The world paused, and then the curse screamed, not aloud, inside. Every echo, every spell, every unspoken wish that had formed the palace cried out as they were ripped from the earth. The throne buckled, fissures opened, and from within them came the slippers, glass, unbroken, still warm, still humming. Mara stared at them. She should have destroyed them. Instead, she placed them in the hollow of a tree, just outside the crumbling gate, buried beneath moss, hidden from all, except the next girl, because there would always be a next girl. But maybe next time she'll choose not to wear them. The palace collapsed behind her, not with fire, not with fury, with silence, the kind that only follows release. The Ash Queen's last dance was not a waltz, but a walk out, free, alone. And as Ella vanished into the mist, with a name no longer bound in blood, a hush fell over the land. Fairy tales would still be told, but this time some would end differently. In a distant village, a child dreamed of a clock that refused to chime. She woke and told her mother, "The glass girl is gone." The mother smiled sadly. "No, darling, she's still here, just learning to walk without a story written for her." And in the fireplace, the cinders stirred once more, not to whisper, but to sleep, somewhere deep in the woods, far beyond where maps end and where wishes go to die. A girl lit a candle made of bone. She did not dance. She did not dream of balls. She sat on the floor of her little home, surrounded by roots that listened and shadows that curled at her feet like cats. Her name was Lyra, and she was one of the ones who didn't go to the palace. Once, a whisper had found her in her sleep. "You are meant for more." But Lyra had known better. She had seen what more meant for girls with soft hearts and hungry eyes. She had watched others vanish, chasing dreams spun from moonlight and cruelty. Some had returned, but they weren't the same. They carried frost in their veins. They wept at mirrors. They walked with glass in their feet. And so Lyra stayed behind. She dug gardens instead of graves. She fed birds from her palm and listened when the wind carried strange lullabies from the forest's edge. She was not brave. She was not chosen. She was not cursed, she was clever, and she lived. The palace had collapsed, yes, but some pieces remained. A clock hand buried in a field of poppies, a slipper etched into the bark of an ancient tree, a song that hummed in the throat of a child who had never been taught it. The story refused to die. It waited, it always did. But this time the girls were wiser. They read the tales and asked, why should she forgive them? Why did the slipper only fit one foot? Why must her beauty be her weapon? And when no one could answer, they wrote their own endings. Ella was never seen again, not truly, but some claimed to spot her reflection in pools too still for comfort. Others heard her laugh in places where no echo should exist, and a few said she walked the world in silence, barefoot and unmarked, helping girls bury their broken glass before it ever touched their skin. Not all believed it, but enough did, enough to change things. In the village nearest the ruins, a girl named Sonia was given a pair of shoes as a gift. They glittered, they shimmered. Her mother smiled and said, now you'll be beautiful. Sonia frowned. She looked at the shoes, and then she looked at her bare feet, calloused from play and adventure, and said, no thank you. She left the shoes behind and walked into the woods, not to find magic, but to make it. There are still balls held in the cities, still crowns passed from one pale hand to another, still tales of glass and grace. But somewhere beneath all that, in the quiet places, a new kind of story grows, one where the girl in the ashes chooses not to be a queen, one where the clock never strikes midnight, one where the ones who didn't dance are still whole, still free, still here. And in those stories, Ella smiles, not with sorrow, not with hunger, but with peace, because the spell was never broken by a kiss. It was broken by a choice. And now, at last, the story sleeps, not forgotten, but finished.